And we're joined by Gerald Bourguet of the Step Back Suns lead writer. Oh, I didn't even say the catchphrase. What the hell is up, everybody? Sorry about that. Gerald Bourguet joining us today on short notice, and he's moving. So, Gerald, we really appreciate you taking a little bit of time, squeezing us in between the finals and the draft. So I know your life is pretty crazy. How you doing, man, with all the craziness?
I'm exhausted, but other than that, I am relatively good. It would have been nice to see the Suns close out a magical playoff run on with that storybook kind of ending, but I was just expecting like one playoff series this year, and I would have been happy with that. So a finals run this year was easily the highlight of my journalism career. It was really fun.
That's awesome. I mean, I was cheering for the Suns the whole way, and I'm sure a lot of Pelicans fans were, given the CP3 and Monty Williams ties, along with now Willie Green. So I was also hoping for a Game 7 because I was probably going to try to go to the Deer District, but didn't
nice.
work out. Yeah. Anyway, we're here to talk a little bit about Willie Green today. We obviously had Dwayne Rankin on a couple weeks ago, and Dwayne was awesome from the Arizona Republic. We'll talk a little bit about that interview, a little bit about what Dwayne said, but today, we've got about 30 minutes. First impressions of the Willie Green hire, Gerald.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of surprised a lot of people because his name popped up out of nowhere. I think for most, especially with a guy like Zion Williamson, you're expecting maybe a more established name, but the Pelicans also did try that last time around with Stan Van Gundy, and that didn't work out. So
yeah,
I'm actually very pleasantly surprised that the Pelicans, went after a guy like Willie Green because he's a really humble, very prepared guy. He's a guy that can relate to players. Obviously, as a former player, he played under Monty Williams and with Chris Paul on that 2010-2011 team in New Orleans. So he's got like kind of a connection there. And he's just a guy that, the players have raved about how he's going to be kind of a player's coach, as a guy that can relate to players, but he also is not afraid to hold back criticism or just tell it to guys straight up. That's one thing that there was the example, I think, heading into Game 6 of the first round series against the Lakers. Willie Green told Chris Paul, who had been playing with kind of a bum shoulder for most of the series, straight up, like, we need you to have an impact so we can win this game and win this series. And Chris Paul was kind of like, damn, Willie, chill. I'm like trying here. But that's just kind of who he is. He's not afraid to let players know how it is. And I think that'll be good for a young Pelicans team that hasn't accomplished anything yet, but is looking to make that same kind of upswing that Phoenix made with a younger core and get back on a playoff track.
So you mentioned you were a little surprised that Willie was in the conversation. I know, I believe he was in the conversation with the Wizards and the Magic too. Mm-hmm. I think so. I could be wrong there. But I know he was in the conversation for a few other head coaching jobs. Given the fact that he is young into his coaching career, do you feel like he's well prepared for this? I mean, we talk about his ability to cultivate relationships and that being so huge. But what you know about Willie, are you confident that he can do a solid job as the next head coach of the Pelicans?
I think so, because I think he's been around enough success during his time in the league. I think he made, 7 playoff trips during his playing career. He was a coach with the Golden State Warriors for 3 years, got to be around Steph and KD and Draymond and all these different personalities, these different egos, star talents. Then he goes to Phoenix for 2 years. He's part of this magical bubble run that the Suns have. And then he's got, more stars to play with as far as Devin Booker, Chris Paul. So he's going to be good at managing, very high-end talents, which is what you want for a team that has Zion for the next probably decade or so. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But I feel like he's going to be very good at managing egos, managing talents, and connecting with players. So that's a huge part of the job, and that's something that he was routinely praised for here in Phoenix. And I think defensively, he's going to be good for the Pelicans as well, because he was kind of in charge of the Suns defense this year, which was ranked 6th in defensive rating in the entire league. So I think he's going to bring a lot of great assets and attributes to this team, even though, it's really hard to predict when an assistant coach becomes a head coach for the first time, how that's going to translate, because some guys are just better in that, kind of secondary role. But I am fairly confident that that won't be the case with Green. I think he has what it takes to be a head coach in this league.
And we had this obviously similar conversation with Dwayne. We brought this up as a topic when we did that interview. The thing that I really feel separates Willie from others in making this transition, and that has made me really excited about Willie, is again his defense. The fact that he's an NBA veteran, or like the institution of the defense, not his defense as an NBA player, but I guess that too. Is the fact that he's an NBA veteran, the fact that he's been on 2 amazing coaching staffs, and that he's been on however many finals runs. I feel I'm probably a lot more confident than a lot of people in Pels media, just because of what I've heard from, well, now you in the 5 minutes we're in, and then also the half an hour that we spoke with Dwayne. I mean, Dwayne just raved about this guy. I mean, it was just one of the things that he mentioned was if Willie doesn't get the job, he's going to be fine. Like, he'll be an NBA head coach later on. And he just essentially believed that Willie could do whatever he wanted. He just holds him in a very high regard. Would you echo that sentiment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just seeing the way that the Suns and hearing about the way that the Suns celebrated him, you know, basically almost getting the job. It wasn't official yet, so they couldn't like officially comment on it, but it was during the finals. I think it was after game 4, and they had a practice, and they basically celebrated that he was going to be the next Pelicans head coach. And, you know, teams normally do that for an assistant that's getting a job elsewhere, but just hearing the way that they raved about him and were so excited for him. Obviously, they were bummed to lose him from their coaching staff, because a guy like that does have an impact on the sidelines, but that kind of just tells you all that you need to know. The way Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Monty Williams were all very excited for him and almost happy to lose him, because success breeds success. And the way that the Suns played this year, they were always going to run the risk of their assistants being, you know, picked up somewhere else. And it's awesome that if that's going to happen, it's going to be for a head coaching job with a transcendent future talent like Zion and Brandon Ingram and all these other guys that are looking to make kind of the same sort of upward trajectory that the Suns have over the last year or two.
Now, the other really big piece besides the NBA veteran, the staffs that he's been on, is that relationship building that he's known for. And I think there's a clip from like a 15-minute podcast that he did with the Suns media team about him making the foundation of all of his relationships from a standpoint of love. Like, I'll be on your ass, but it's because I love you, you know, kind of thing. And when we talked with Dwayne, he referenced 3 stories. One of them was the CP3 story going into game 6. The fact that all the players just love him, like the fact that he can be the guy who's on your ass, but also be the guy who can joke around and be your friend at the same time. And then third was that he played one-on-one with Devin Booker on occasion, just for practice purposes. Do you have any stories or any extra bits about those specific stories that you know exemplify Willie Green's relationship with the players, or his ability to cultivate the relationships with the players?
Yeah, I mean, I think those ones sum it up pretty nicely. And it's kind of interesting because Monty Williams, when you look at Monty Williams and hearing what you were saying just now about Willie Green, those are very much attributes that I tie directly to Monty. Like, he's kind of like Monty Williams-esque in that regard. I don't think he's going to have some of the dorky little quips, the Monty-isms that Williams throws out there on occasion, but it very much is a case where, like, Monty's whole approach is rooted in love. It's rooted in these guys being his friends, not just his players, you know, guys that he sees as commodities that help him win games. Like, it's much deeper than that. And Willie Green is the exact same way. So that's a great attribute to bring to a new team that has, you know, seen some turnover in the last couple of years, especially on the head coaching front. I do remember, like, earlier in the season, one thing that stood out to me was how willing Monty was to praise Willie Green. And he's a pretty gracious dude in general, but like, for him to shout out an assistant coach after a game where the Suns defense played really well and kind of accredit Willie Green for that and kind of deflect praise, because the question was very, generous towards Monty as far as like, how is your defense playing so well? And he was just like, "Just Willie Green," honestly.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Willie Green is super prepared. He is the architect of our defense. And he's very active on the sidelines. You can just see him. I don't have like a specific story that comes to mind, but you can see how fired up he is. And you hear just little things here and there about how on game days, like, he's ready to go, how he's motivating some of these players, or how, he's challenging them and firing them up in turn. So I think these are all tremendous things that you want to hear about your new head coach, especially if he's a guy who hasn't had a head coaching experience yet. At least he's bringing a lot of these attributes to the table from day one.
Now, you talk about the defense, and that's another big pull for a lot of Pelicans fans when bringing Willie in. Is the defense that the Suns put together, is it replicable? Can they replicate it in New Orleans? Is that something that, despite not having a DeAndre Ayton and a veteran like a Chris Paul, because Eric Bledsoe's definitely not Chris Paul, is that something that the Pels can replicate?
I think in the long term, yes. I think with the current roster, I'm not so sure about that, because the Suns have a good defense, but they also have a lot of good defenders. You talk about Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Torrey Craig, these multi-positional wings. Like, that is hard to replicate if you don't have the personnel for it. Even taking into account DeAndre Ayton's leap on the defensive end, Chris Paul, who's just very smart, even if he's undersized and getting a bit older now. Devin Booker, who's been underrated on defense for like the last year, but made real strides on a winning team this season as well. I think you need the personnel for it. I think Willie Green will help in that regard, especially in terms of scheme, in terms of making sure guys are motivated and locked in on that end. But there is a part of that Suns defense that just ties back to the personnel that they had and all the wings that they had that could play multiple positions. That obviously does not hurt if you're trying to put together a top 10 defense.
Right. And the Pelicans, they have Brandon Ingram, who is, his frame is conducive to being good at defense. He was not this last year. And then there's Najee Marshall, who has really just exploded onto the scene for the Pelicans. I'm not sure how much you got to watch the Pels or have heard about Najee, but I mean, I put a whole article together mentioning how good he could be, in effect, the new Lou Dort, but like 6'7". So that's the goal, obviously. And then looking at the draft, a lot of people are hoping for a Moses Moody or maybe a Franz Wagner, but he's not the high ceiling guy. And so, also, getting rid of Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams, maybe you get something in return. But do you think that a role-playing center, and that maybe that's not fair either. But Jackson Hayes, he's really just on the rise. He was awful. We were calling for Billy Hernangomez minutes when the season started. And he's not quite as strong or as thick as a DeAndre Ayton, but do you see the capability there to maybe be an anchor of a defense like Ayton more or less was this last year?
I mean, that's the hope. It's one of those rough things where if you're a guy in your first or second year and your minutes are kind of fluctuating, especially with Steven Adams coming in, it's hard to project that at this point. And you would probably know better than I would, but
sure.
I've from what I've watched of the Pelicans, I've liked Jackson Hayes. I've liked the energy that he brings. I've liked just the threat that he brings as a rim roller, because anything that's thrown above the rim, that guy is going to try and get it and throw it down, for better or worse, honestly. But I really do feel like right now he's in a role that's conducive to his growth. And I think that hopefully you get him in a position where, okay, now it's time to expand those minutes. It's time to put him in a starting role full time and see how he fares in that role. You hope that he could be a defensive anchor, but honestly, it's tough because I honestly didn't see DeAndre Ayton making the leap that he made this year on the defensive end. We always knew that he had the physical attributes, the athleticism, the length to be that guy. but he didn't have the kind of mental focus, the consistent effort, just the know-how to do that. I think Willie Green helped in that regard for sure, especially if we're talking about defensive architects here. Mark West, another assistant coach, he really helped in that respect. And then there's Monty. So you're hoping for, with Willie Green coming to New Orleans, you're hoping that he can maybe have that same type of impact on a younger guy like Jackson Hayes. He doesn't have the same, intangibles that you would want from a defensive anchor, but I do think that he has more than enough size, length, and clearly leaping ability to be a rim protector down there.
Right. Watch the Pelicans go out and draft Keon Johnson and just try to be the most athletic team in the whole NBA. But and I think had you watched more of the Pelicans this last year, I mean, I went from being so low on Jackson Hayes to like just put him in any trade. He's a high ceiling big. He's young. Get him out of here. But credit to Stan Van Gundy and his staff. He and Nickeil Alexander-Walker just exploded comparatively to what they were. They're not, stars by any means, but they've shown some real flashes, especially Jackson Hayes. Now, to continue a little bit more about Willie Green, in terms of that development, was he like instrumental in the development of some of these young guys? We talked about DeAndre Ayton, but then there's the Mikal Bridges, there's Devin Booker on defense. Does a lot of the credit go to Willie Green for the development of these young guys? Obviously, you got to give credit to Monty Williams too, but Willie Green, how important was he in the development of those young guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was a big part of it. Obviously, like you said, Monty is the guy that you're going to look to credit first and foremost, followed very closely by Chris Paul. But just the way that Green relates to his players, the way that he's able to tell them things straight up. Because sometimes as a head coach, like I know Monty did this as well, but you can't always go full blast on guys when they mess up, because you have these relationships to maintain and to balance and find the right balance there. So sometimes it is nice to have an assistant that'll come in and say what needs to be said. And I think Green is fully capable of being that guy. So I think that's a good thing to have. I think he did play a part in the youngsters' development, just because I mean, every part of the Suns this year was a successful piece, honestly. Like you had guys like Etuan Moore coming in and hitting game winners against the Spurs in April in a game where they're resting guys. Like this whole team 1 through 15 was prepared, and you don't do that without having a very prepared coaching staff. And that was something Chris Paul, Devin Booker, all of the guys said all season long. Like no one is going to out-prepare the Phoenix Suns just because of the work that this coaching staff puts in, not just Monty, but everyone up and down the coaching staff. So that bodes well if you're a Pelicans fan and hoping for, progress on the defensive end. You're hoping for development from the youngsters. You're hoping for a better strategy, I guess, than, not shooting a lot of threes. You're hoping for a coach that understands what it takes to win in this league, and playing on 2 3-point shooting teams, or coaching for 2 3-point shooting teams like the Warriors and the Suns. Hopefully that rubs off on a team like the Pelicans that needs to take more threes and spread the ball a little bit for a guy who, when he gets downhill, is just absolutely unstoppable.
And now that we're talking about the offense, shooting more threes, providing a little bit of spacing for Zion and Brandon Ingram and Jackson Hayes to work a little bit, how much did Willie have to do with the offense? We know that he was kind of the coordinator of the defense. He really was the architect of that. But at times in the half court, the Pelicans offense really looked archaic last year. They didn't. Their pace was not high enough, especially with Zion and Jackson and Lonzo Ball in transition. Right. Anyway. How much can Willie bring to the offensive side of things? Is that something that he can improve, or would he have, a Fred Vinson step into a role like that, or a Teresa Weatherspoon? These are assistant coaches if you don't recognize the names. But right. Would you think that Willie would have an impact on the offensive side of things?
I think he could. I think that's the part of, if you're looking at assistant head coaches and saying, okay, I'm not really sure how they're going to translate, because you really never know with someone that hasn't done the job before. You can speculate and you can project, but you don't know for sure. I think the offensive side is where I would hesitate to project or speculate because I just don't really know. I know that the defense was his big thing in Phoenix, but he did play around he did coach around a top 10 offense in Phoenix. I'm sure there's a lot that he picked up, and being an assistant coach on a team, you know the offense. Like you're not just focused on one side of the floor and that's all you know. So I think he will have picked up on some good things. Obviously, in Golden State and in Phoenix, he had more established talent to work with, which is where the challenge is going to come in, because when you're working with a younger team that doesn't have that same, championship caliber level of talent, it's all about the scheme. It's all about implementing a culture and putting in these tenets that are going to work for you moving forward as you continue to upgrade the roster. So I think in terms of culture, it's going to be fine. I think in terms of defensive scheme, it's going to be great. I don't know about the offense, but honestly, based on what I saw from the Pelicans, the way that you were describing their offense and just looking at the raw numbers of how many threes they were attempting per game, it seems like something that can go only uphill, especially with a coach that's coached for successful teams and understands modern basketball in that way.
And at the very least, you can say Griff knows that they need shooting. Like,
right.
And so so does everybody else, right? And I would like to think that the amount that Eric Bledsoe played last year was because of Stan Van Gundy and his rigidness and not wanting to play the young guys. And you mentioned the fact that Willie has coached guys and been on staffs that have led Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond, now Booker, CP3, like Mikal Bridges. What I'm really hoping for is, the comps for Brandon Ingram, well, the whole like the high ceiling comps for Brandon Ingram were like a Kevin Durant, and could he bring that to? What I'm really hoping for is that Willie's able to, I guess, sort of metaphorically reach into Kevin Durant's bag and pull stuff out and help Brandon Ingram with that. At least in the individual portion of things on the offense, maybe not the offense as a whole. Is that something that you think he can impart to these guys, that he's like, look what Book did in this situation, and you can do this too, even with like a Nickeil Alexander-Walker?
Yeah, I think so. I think based on just that saying that I brought up earlier, success breeds success. Like, he's been on two fantastic teams. He's been on multiple finals runs as an assistant coach. He understands the work ethic, the daily mentality, the grind that it takes to get there. And that's something that a young team generally doesn't understand, especially one that hasn't been to the playoffs in a while. A lot of these guys are on the younger side of things. And that's honestly how we would have described Phoenix just a couple of seasons ago. They were a really talented young group, but they had never experienced success in the NBA to that point. And it was aggravating to hear things said about, Devin Booker being an empty stats guy, or, Mikal Bridges doesn't do anything on offense, or DeAndre Ayton can never be a two-way player. The potential was there. You just have to find the right people to tap into it and to show them what it takes to win at this level. It takes bringing in veterans, like even before Chris Paul and Jay Crowder this year, like Ricky Rubio and Aaron Baines and even Kelly Oubre Jr. to a respect. Like it doesn't happen overnight. There will need to be changes to the roster, bringing in veteran talent that actually wants to be there. No offense to Mr. Bledsoe, but
you get full offense. No, full offense.
It's so rough because Eric Bledsoe used to be a great two-way player, and even with the Bucks before the playoffs started, he was great for them. Before the playoffs really started,
right?
Like playoff Eric Bledsoe is just a whole different individual. I don't know what happens to that, but it's rough because every team that he's been on has eventually wanted him gone. It's sad, but I really do think that bringing in veterans that want to be there, that want to be a part of Zion's first chapter and next chapter, like that's huge. And that's something that you hope that Willie Green can kind of lay a foundation as far as, okay, this upcoming year, maybe they don't get a bunch of those veteran guys that are going to help turn things around right away, but they at least do something to the effect of what the Suns did in the bubble. Because if the Suns didn't get invited to the bubble, this whole finals run never happens. Like Chris Paul doesn't want to be traded to Phoenix to play with Devin Booker. Jay Crowder doesn't turn down 12 other teams to sign with the Suns. Guys like Langston Galloway, Etuan Moore, they don't sign for the veteran minimum to be a part of this, because you're not going to tell me that the clip of Monty Williams' locker room speech to the guys after going 8-0 in the bubble, that viral clip, didn't play a part on the way these guys saw Phoenix, because this franchise had been losers for 10 straight years, basically. So I think that you are hoping that Willie Green can have that same kind of impact as, a Monty Williams light sort of guy, and sort of gradually change this perception of New Orleans, because, right now it feels like the last 2 seasons, everyone's been so excited about Zion and the team hasn't made the playoffs, even though, they're on national TV a lot, even though we're trying to get them in there with the play-in situation and stuff. Like, the general vibe seems to be like, man, we wish they were a little bit better so we could like fully enjoy Zion. You're hoping that Willie Green pushes them past that step and into, okay, this team is fun. They're going to be a contender for years to come around this guy. Maybe we should consider going to New Orleans and playing with this guy, even though we're a veteran. Maybe we should consider helping Zion become a winner in this league, because it's only a matter of time. We might as well get on this train before it leaves the station, like that kind of thing. And I think that's where you're hoping Willie Green can implement that culture, set them up for success with kind of a more winning mentality and a system that translates into wins on the basketball court.
So the end all be all question, more or less, this is something that I referenced before we started, was Griff and the fact that Jacques Vaughn turned down the job in New Orleans because Griff basically wants his hands in everything. He's a control freak. We know that he's kind of a what I would say is not putting things nicely. He wants his hands in everything. We'll just leave it that way. You'd got to think that, especially after Vaughn turned down the job because of that at least you would hope that he'd still bring that up with Willie Green, because you want somebody who knows the role of the job. I think it's pretty clear that Van Gundy didn't this last year, and that there was just, from what I've heard, there was just friction after like 3 weeks. And,
really?
That's the last. Yeah, that's the last thing you want, obviously. And so, based on what you know about Willie, how will that go over? Do you think he'll be able to manage that well? Do you think he'll be able to go back and forth with the ego of Griff and be able to maintain a healthy relationship with his boss, in effect?
I think that's going to be an interesting part of it. And I honestly don't know if I can give you a straight answer. I know that Willie Green obviously has dealt with his fair share of egos, as far as, like even these guys are generally pretty humble, these stars that we're talking about, but they do have egos. They are like mega stars, these all world personalities, not just basketball players, but personalities too. So I think he has experience in that regard. I do think it is a little bit different when you switch it up from coaching a player to dealing with what is effectively your boss and an executive, because that can be pretty tedious. That can be bothersome, especially for a first-year head coach that's coming in and wants to kind of do his thing and set this team up for success. I think that might leave him a little more vulnerable to accepting input from that kind of person. And I don't think it's something that he has much experience in, because in Phoenix, at least, you're talking about James Jones being the GM there. James Jones is a guy that, like, he made his roster moves and he's not messing with what the team is doing. Like, he's not sticking his hands in anywhere. If anything, Monty and the coaching staff are coming to him with thoughts, and then he's opening up. I don't foresee that being the relationship with Griffin, based on what you're saying, and just based on knowing Griffin and how hands-on he is. And he is very much kind of a control freak in that way. So I think that might be a challenge for him in New Orleans. Hopefully it's something that he's up for and that he's willing to kind of accommodate Griffin, but still do what he wants to do at the end of the day. I think, at the end of the day, if they're successful, if the Pelicans are successful, it's not going to matter as much. But it is kind of worrisome that Van Gundy came in and there was friction there within a couple of weeks. Van Gundy is a very different personality. I think he's also very much a control freak in that regard. So hopefully Willie Green is more of the personality that will be able to put up with it and still manage to do what he wants to do.
Hopefully. Well, not that I doubt Willie at all. This is definitely way more about the micromanagement of Griffin. But anyway, we told you we'd keep it to half an hour. Got to be respectful of your time because you're a moving man and staying busy. I'm sure you're getting ready for the draft now too. So best of luck with that, Gerald. At Gerald Bourguet on Twitter. I'm going to spell that for you. Maybe. Here we go. Bourguet. Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, all right. Go give him a follow. Excellent Suns coverage there. Excellent NBA coverage as well. Gerald, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, Elliot. Thanks for having me on.